It has been an unprecedented start to this wildfire season, with serious fires burning in almost every province and territory. Over the month of May, roughly 2.7 million hectares of forest went up in flames. As of this morning, there were 214 fires burning across the country. 93 of them are out of control. We've seen just how destructive those fires can be in Fort McMurray back in 2016, or just 2 years ago in Lytton, BC. Entire communities devastated by the flames. So is this the new normal for wildfires in Canada, and what should we expect going forward? Jennifer Baltzer is the Canada Research Chair in Forests and Global Change at Wilfrid Laurier University. Professor Baltzer, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It seems like every part of the country is dealing with this. There are wildfires everywhere. Is this the new reality for the country, or is this just an unusual year?
Well, I think the answer to that is a little bit, it's up to us a bit. So, what we're facing right now with these, big wildfire years year after year, and particularly this early spring, is a change in fire activity that goes hand in hand with climate warming. So we're seeing hotter, drier conditions, longer growing seasons that provide the, hot, dry conditions that promote burning for longer periods of time. And those conditions are, part and parcel of the climate warming that we're seeing happening, and happening very rapidly here in Canada. So does the future hold, is the future of a more fiery future for Canada? I think if we stay on a kind of business as usual track, then the answer would be yes. We've already, since about the 1970s, we've already seen a twofold increase in area burned in Canada. We expect to see that continue with a warming climate. Now, if we take action, if our governments decide to take action and really rapidly work toward climate change mitigation by reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, we can make a different future than that.
There are the challenges, though. We had officials in Nova Scotia saying that conditions are an unfortunate perfect firestorm, and the Premier even said he thinks one of the fires was started by someone flicking a cigarette butt out of a car window. So it seems to be this interaction between climate change and sloppy human behavior in some cases. That's
absolutely the case, that, when you have these really hot, dry conditions, or even just dry and warm conditions is what they're experiencing in Nova Scotia. There was a very low snowpack in Nova Scotia last winter. So they started the season dry. The farmers are already dealing with drought in their fields. And then you have warm conditions. You have a situation where a lot of the landscape can be quite flammable, and so accidental ignitions by humans can be a pretty major contributor, which is why in both Alberta and Nova Scotia there's active exclusion of people from these forested areas right now to try to reduce that source of ignition. We can't control lightning, but we can control accidental ignitions by people.
There are the knock-on effects of these fires too, right? I mean, the smoke, the air pollution, and forests, of course, are fantastic carbon sinks. And when they go up in smoke, that becomes a challenge for the climate. So just talk about the consequences of this beyond the property loss and forcing humans to be evacuated.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the first thing we think about is those, really scary times for so many people that they're experiencing across the country, where they're evacuated from their homes, where they're losing property, where their lives can be at risk as they're evacuating. Anyone who's lived through, lived in an area where wildfire is burning actively nearby, the smoke, the day-to-day exposure to this thick smoke is really hard, both psychologically and on your health. And it takes a real toll when you're experiencing that, not just for one fire season, but for multiple fire seasons, as we're seeing now in Western Canada, where, folks in BC seem to have year after year of these smoky, hot, fiery conditions. So there's obviously the human health implications. A really big one is that carbon piece. So our forests do take up a lot of carbon. And climate warming is driving this increase in area burned. So when a fire moves through an area, a lot of carbon is released. In fact, last year, wildfire was the biggest source of carbon emissions from the country. And so we see this increase in carbon emissions from forests that goes up to the atmosphere. then contributes to atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations, which can act to further warm the planet. And so we have this positive feedback that's a really big concern and a really big problem. And of course, there's also the concern that these forests that have acted as carbon sinks for a very long time, as we burn them more frequently, more severely, that there's the potential that they could shift toward being carbon sources instead.
No,
and then finally,
I was going to say, it's a vicious cycle that you describe, right? That we plant trees and we grow forests to capture it, but when they burn, it releases everything, and it has that negative consequence that you're talking about.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, fire has been a natural part of these landscapes for a very long time, and so it's very, very important for the function and health of these forests. But when the fires start to become these, larger, more severe fires, this is where we become concerned. And those kinds of fires have ecological consequences as well. So we know that when we have short interval fires, when we have very severe fires, this can alter the way forests regenerate following fire, changing which species are able to come in, sometimes shifting it from forest to non-forested. And so this has implications for the way people can use forests, the way wildlife use forests, and a whole lot of different functions relating to, water and carbon and energy fluxes from the forests.
We had Bill Blair on the program last night, the Minister for Emergency Preparedness, and they do the assessment every year, and he said the next 6 weeks look pretty rough across the country. And you're seeing that when we put up the maps of where the fires are. The number of provinces without big burns is dwarfed by the provinces with it. So how do you get ahead of something like this? Are there forestry practices? I know the big issue is reducing emissions of fossil fuel emissions, and dealing with climate change. Are there other things towns, provinces, and the federal government can do to try to mitigate against this as well?
Well, so, I mean, we're already seeing some of those being implemented. So when we know conditions are, really dangerous from a fire perspective, keeping people out of those areas so we can reduce sources of ignition and reduce the number of fires that our fire management, our fire crews have to deal with on the landscape. There are lots of conversations being had at various scales about how do we reduce fuels on the landscape so the fires that do move through are not burning as severely as they currently are. A combination of climate warming and very effective fire suppression in the past has led to a situation where we have greater flammability plus more fuel on the landscape. And so can we reduce that fuel load by thinning, by prescribed fire? These are conversations that folks are having across the country to try to maintain good fire on the landscape, while not having these sort of large catastrophic fires that are not controllable. And there's lots of technologies as well that are being developed to help with fire detection and fire forecasting that will help improve our ability to detect fires and anticipate and predict their behavior, so we can improve some of the safety components of that as well.
Jennifer Baltzer, Canada Research Chair in Forest and Global Change at Wilfrid Laurier University. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.